We're also finally getting some answers about what might have caused the tragic crash of a UPS plane shortly after takeoff earlier this month.
UPS says it's with great sadness that it shares the names of the 3 pilots who died.
There's so much charred, mangled metal that not all of the bodies may have been located.
Imagine you're watching a massive cargo jet thunder down the runway, packed with 38,000 gallons of fuel, ready to cross the Pacific Ocean. Everything looks normal. The crew is experienced. The weather is perfect. The engines roar to life. Then, in the blink of an eye, an engine tears away from the wing like it was held on with tape. Fire erupts. The jet barely climbs. And within seconds, 14 people are dead.
We begin tonight here with these chilling new images now released of that deadly crash, the engine coming right off the plane moments before it went down in Louisville, killing 14 people.
This isn't a movie. This is UPS Flight 2976. And what investigators discovered buried in the wreckage is so terrifying that it forced federal officials to ground an entire fleet of cargo jets overnight. But here's what will really keep you up at night. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a disaster that had been quietly building for years, and nobody noticed until it was too late. The routine departure. November 4th, 2025. A clear Tuesday afternoon in Louisville, Kentucky. At Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport, it's just another busy shift. Cargo jets are lining up. Thousands of workers are moving packages through UPS's massive Worldport facility. 5 million square feet of sorting machinery processing more than 2 million packages every night. The weather? Calm. The runway? Dry. Nothing unusual about this shift at all. One of the departures scheduled that afternoon is UPS Flight 2976, a Douglas MD-11 freighter headed to Honolulu. This route crosses the entire continent, then a huge stretch of the Pacific Ocean, so the crew needs a very heavy fuel load. Roughly 38,000 gallons of jet fuel. That's well over 200,000 pounds of highly flammable liquid. In the cockpit are 3 experienced pilots with thousands of hours on large jets, including long-time experience on the MD-11. There are no passengers aboard, only crew, fuel, and stacks of packages filling the long cargo hold. For the people working at Worldport, this departure is completely routine. Every night, aircraft come and go in tight waves. Flight 2976 blends into that normal flow. But what happens in the next 90 seconds will change everything. To understand what went wrong, you need to picture a takeoff in simple terms. The pilots line up on the runway, push the thrust levers forward, and the airplane races down the pavement. At first, if something goes wrong, there's still room to hit the brakes and stop. But there's a critical point called the decision speed, where they're basically committed to flying. Once they pass that point, trying to stop could be more dangerous than lifting off, even if there's a serious problem. The catastrophic failure. According to tracking data and the first NTSB report,
the NTSB photos released today show the left engine and the pylon holding it to the UPS plane's wing, coming off the plane as it began to take off.
The start of the takeoff roll down runway 17 right at around 5:13 in the afternoon looked completely normal. The big cargo jet accelerated smoothly. The engines roared evenly. Everything by the book. Then, just as the jet was rotating to lift its nose, something unthinkable happened. The left engine, and much of its mounting structure, suddenly tore away from the wing. Airport surveillance cameras and phone videos captured what happened next, and it's the stuff of nightmares. The engine flipped up and over the leading edge of the wing, trailing fire like a comet, before tumbling onto the grass beside the runway. Flames immediately broke out near the spot where the engine had been attached under the left wing, and that fire did not go out. Despite this catastrophic loss, the MD-11 still managed to leave the ground, but barely. It climbed only a short distance, never getting more than a few stories above the terrain. It was moving at a speed similar to a car on a fast highway, just over 200 mph, with the landing gear still down. Video clips show a growing orange glow on the left side of the airplane as the wing fire intensifies. Other footage and expert analysis suggest that the tail-mounted center engine may also have been hit by flying debris, sending bursts of flame from the exhaust and robbing the crew of even more thrust. Ask yourself this: how do you control a massive jet that's on fire, missing an engine, barely above the ground, and carrying enough fuel to cross an ocean? The answer is, you can't. Within seconds, the big cargo jet began to roll and drift left. With one wing on fire and the engines no longer pushing evenly,
Flames seen coming from the left wing as it leaves the runway. You can see the engine breaking apart, that engine clearly separating from the wing.
the airplane could not climb cleanly away from the airport. It cleared the fence at the end of the runway, but instead of rising into the Kentucky sky, it slipped toward the busy industrial strip that sits just beyond the airfield, a part of Louisville called COP. The devastating impact. The first major impact came when the left main landing gear smashed into the roof of a UPS Supply Chain Solutions warehouse at the southern edge of the airport. The impact ripped open a gash almost the length of a football field. Inside that building, people who had been loading and sorting freight suddenly found the ceiling collapsing, fire raining down, and the lights going out as the structure shook violently around them. But the crippled jet didn't stop there. Still rolling left, it plowed into the Kentucky Petroleum Recycling Depot next door. Its left wing struck a cluster of fuel tanks. When those tanks ruptured, they sent up a huge fireball that was seen and filmed from miles away. The airplane then rolled even further, more than 90 degrees onto its side, before crashing into a parking area packed with semi-trailers and the Grade A auto parts scrapyard, full of cars, metal, fuel, and other flammable material. By the time the wreckage stopped moving, multiple buildings were burning or destroyed. The debris field stretched for roughly half a mile beyond the first impact point. Twisted metal from the airplane, shredded trailers, auto, parts, and pieces of roofing were scattered across streets and parking lots. A thick column of black smoke rose over Louisville for hours, visible across the city, and even on satellite images taken from space. Inside the fire zone, workers and visitors had only seconds to react. Some people managed to run from warehouses and offices as alarms sounded and flames spread. Others were trapped by falling debris or sudden explosions. The final death toll? 14 people killed. All 3 crew members on the airplane.
Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear tonight points to the most startling NTSB finding in this crash that killed 14 people.
And 11 people on the ground. People who were just going about their normal workday when a burning jet fell from the sky. Another 23 people on the ground were injured, 2 of them critically. Among the dead were a 3-year-old girl and her grandfather, who had simply been going about a normal day when the jet came down. The aftermath. Survivors later described the scene as pure chaos. Workers told reporters they felt the building shudder, dove under desks or work tables, and then stumbled out into the open air-lit orange by fire. Others talked about choking on smoke while trying to help co-workers, or sprinting away as fuel tanks exploded behind them. First responders said the site looked almost apocalyptic, with rows of burning trucks and cars and chunks of airplanes scattered everywhere. Louisville's emergency managers quickly realized this was more than a normal industrial fire. Because the jet had been carrying so much fuel and had crashed in a corridor full of chemicals, scrap metal, and plastics, officials ordered people within about 5 miles of the airport to stay indoors. They told residents to close windows and doors, shut off air conditioning systems that might pull in outside air, and wait for updates on their phones and local news. More than 100 firefighters, medics, and hazmat specialists poured into the crash area. Their first job was to knock down the worst of the flames so they could safely reach the wreckage. After that came the search for survivors and the slow, careful work of making sure every hot spot was out and every corner of the debris field had been checked. By late that night, officials said the main fires were mostly contained, but crews stayed on scene spraying foam and water, checking for leaking fuel and watching for flare-ups. At the same time, the airport itself came to a halt. All flights in and out of Louisville were suspended for hours, and one of the main runways stayed closed longer as investigators and cleanup teams worked around the wreckage. UPS temporarily stopped operations at Worldport, freezing a major piece of the overnight shipping network. Public schools in the surrounding district were closed the next day, in part because of air quality concerns, and in part because so many families and workers were directly touched by the crash. This was the deadliest accident in UPS history and one of the worst crashes ever to involve an MD-11. But now the real questions began. What caused this? And could it happen again? The investigation begins. In the United States, aircraft accident investigations are led by the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, an independent safety agency whose mission is to learn what went wrong and how to stop it from happening again. Within hours of the crash, the NTSB launched what they call a GO team to Louisville. About 28 specialists arrived at the airport the next day, along with engineers and observers from the FAA, UPS, Boeing, General Electric, and the Pilots Union. Their first goal? Secure anything that could carry information. That meant finding the two black boxes. Despite the name, these recorders are bright orange so searchers can see them in Wreckage. Every large jet carries a cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, and a flight data recorder, the FDR. One records cockpit sound. The other tracks the plane's vital signs: speed, altitude, engine performance, control inputs. Both recorders from Flight 2976 were found in the debris field, burned on the outside but still in one piece. They were flown to the NTSB's recorder lab in Washington, D.C., where specialists opened the crash-protected memory units, cleaned away soot and melted material, and connected them to special readers. They were able to pull out good quality information from both recorders, including the entire accident flight. When NTSB board member Todd Inman spoke to the press, he shared one of the first clear clues from the recordings.
Transportation Safety Board. I'm the on-scene board member for this accident.
About 37 seconds after the crew called for takeoff power, a bell started to sound in the cockpit. Not a single chime, a repeating steady bell that kept going for about 25 seconds, right up to the end of the recording. During that whole time, the crew could be heard trying to fly the aircraft and keep control. For people who don't live in this world, different warning tones might all sound similar. But on many aircraft, a repeating bell means a serious problem, such as an engine fire or another major system failure. For the investigation team, it clearly marked the moment when the pilots knew something had gone badly wrong. While the audio group studied the sounds, the data group rebuilt the short flight in numbers and pictures. They combined the flight data recorder output with radar tracks and signals from the plane's automatic tracking beacon, known as ADS-B. By lining up those sources, they could see how fast the jet was moving, how far it got from the ground, and how quickly it rolled and fell in the final seconds. This confirmed that the takeoff roll itself looked normal at first. Then, something sudden happened while the plane was still racing down the runway. Security cameras around the airport had already captured parts of that moment. Investigators froze those clips frame by frame and matched them to the timestamps from the data recorders. That work helped set the order of events. The debris field tells its story. Back at the crash site, another group was busy with more hands-on work. They laid out the debris field on a map and divided it into a grid. Every large piece of wreckage was tagged and photographed where it lay before being moved. Far closer to the runway, along the left side, searchers found the entire left engine and much of the pylon structure. Now, what's a pylon? The pylon is like a strong bracket that holds the engine under the wing. That bracket is fixed to the wing at two main spots: a forward mount closer to the nose and an aft mount closer to the tail. Each mount has thick metal ears called lugs and a big round joint in the middle called a spherical bearing. The wing side has its own matching fork called the wing clevis, and a heavy bolt goes through everything to tie it together. The bearing lets the engine move a tiny bit as the wing flexes, while the lugs and bolt take the main load. Investigators brought the engine and its broken mounting hardware to a secure hangar so they could examine every bolt hole and fracture line under bright lights and microscopes. At the same time, other specialists began building a life story for the airplane itself. They pulled the aircraft's maintenance logs, repair records, and inspection reports. They noted that this MD-11 had first flown in the early 1990s as a passenger jet before being converted to a freighter years later. By the time of the crash, it had spent more than 3 decades in hard service. They reviewed the recent heavy maintenance visit in Texas, when the jet had been taken out of service for several weeks, so a cracked fuel tank could be repaired and corrosion found in some internal beams could be treated. None of those facts on their own proved anything, but they raised clear questions. Had every inspection of the engine mounts been done on time and in the right way? Were there places on the pylon that were hard to reach or easy to miss during a routine visual check? Could years of cargo work, with heavy fuel loads and long flights, have slowly worn down some key part until it finally gave way on that November evening? All the arrows were pointing toward a single place, where the engine met the wing. To move beyond that hunch, they would have to go deeper, cutting into the broken mount itself and studying the metal in detail. What they discovered would turn a terrible crash into a much bigger warning. The smoking gun. When investigators laid out the parts from the left engine mount, they saw at once that this neat engineering picture had come apart in a very ugly way. On the wing fragment from that side, they found the aft mount hardware, the clevis, the spherical bearing, and the bolt, still stuck in place. But the matching lugs from the pylon side were gone. Those broken lugs were instead found up by runway 17 right where the left engine first came off. The NTSB Materials Lab then looked at those lugs and the bearing under a microscope.
The NTSB is now out with its preliminary findings.
Their preliminary report says both the forward and aft lugs on that aft mount had cracked and then snapped. On the aft lug, they found fine beach mark patterns on both sides of the break, the classic sign of metal fatigue.
Metal fatigue appears to be a factor in a mishap involving a United Airlines plane bound for Honolulu.
On the forward lug, they saw fatigue along the bore on one side and a final rough overstress break on the other, which means it broke suddenly after carrying too much load. The spherical bearing was also found broken in a ring, with the inner ball exposed. Now, for people who don't live in this world, fatigue can sound like the metal just got tired in one day. That's not how it works. Think of bending a paperclip back and forth. Each bend does almost nothing at first, but inside, tiny cracks grow a little bit every time, until suddenly, the clip snaps. The same thing can happen in metal parts on airplanes. Every takeoff and landing flexes and loads the mounts. Over thousands of cycles, small cracks can start at sharp corners or at the edge of a hole and grow slowly, even when the stress on each flight is normal. The final seconds look like a sudden break, but the real damage has been building for years. Under the heavy push of that takeoff, with a full fuel load for a long trip to Hawaii, the cracked lug finally let go. Once that first lug fractured, the job of holding the engine shifted onto the remaining lug and the bearing. They were never meant to carry that much load alone. In a split second, they were pulled past their limits and failed too. That's why the forward lug shows more signs of a sudden overload break. Once both lugs and the bearing gave way, the entire pylon aft mount tore free and the left engine vaulted up and over the wing, just as seen in security videos. The terrifying parallel. If this story sounds familiar to older engineers, there's a reason. Back in the late 1970s, American Airlines Flight 191, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, lost its left engine and pylon during takeoff from Chicago. In that case, an engine change done with a forklift had bent and cracked the pylon mount months earlier. During a later takeoff, the weakened mount failed. The engine went over the wing, ripped away a section of the leading edge, and the plane rolled over and crashed. All 271 people on board died. It remains the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. Now, here we are again. Same manufacturer family, same type of failure, same catastrophic result. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why didn't anyone catch this before it killed 14 more people? The mounts on jets like this have special inspection rules. The manufacturer sets a number of flights after which a very detailed check of the mount must be done. For this aft mount, that deep inspection was set to start at around 28,000 cycles. This particular jet had not yet reached that trigger number. By the time of the crash, it had logged about 92,992 flight hours and just over 21,000 flight cycles. It had been through more basic visual checks, including one in October 2021, and nothing was written up about the left aft mount at that time. So here's the nightmare scenario. These cracks were growing silently, hidden inside the metal, completely invisible during routine inspections. And by the time the jet reached the cycle count that would have triggered the deep inspection that might have caught them. The emergency response. Once investigators reached that point, their focus shifted dramatically. The question was no longer just, why did one UPS jet come apart on takeoff? The bigger fear became, how many other hard-working freighters are flying right now with the same hidden damage in the same place? And what does that mean for every airport and every community under their flight paths? The first big shock came from the regulators. Just 4 days after the crash, the Federal Aviation Administration issued an emergency airworthiness directive for every MD-11 and MD-11 freighter in the country. In simple terms, an airworthiness directive is a legally binding safety order. An emergency one is the strongest tool the FAA has. It tells operators, you are not allowed to fly this type again until you do these checks and fix whatever we find. In this case, the order grounded the type until detailed inspections of the engine mounts were done using a method the FAA itself approved. That order didn't remain a short memo. Within a few weeks, the FAA turned it into a longer-term rule that replaces the quick emergency stop.
FAA rules require 5-mile separation in flight to avoid the danger of wake turbulence,
with a full inspection program going forward. Until operators can prove each airframe is safe under the new standards, those aircraft stay on the ground. Grounding a whole model is rare. The MD-11 and its close cousin, the DC-10, are not passenger workhorses anymore, but they still matter a lot in cargo. Before the crash, there were a little over 100 MD-11s in service worldwide, and about 10 more DC-10-based freighters, most of them flying boxes at night for big names like UPS, FedEx, and Western Global Airlines.
As NTSB investigators comb through wreckage of this deadly MD-11 cargo plane crash in Louisville, Kentucky, dozens of MD-11s now grounded by two of the nation's top parcel carriers, FedEx and UPS.
When the FAA order hit, UPS parked its roughly 24 MD-11s, which make up close to 1/10 of its fleet. FedEx did the same with its own tri-jets. This all happened just as the busy holiday shipping season was starting. The ripple effects. Instead of their usual pattern of MD-11s moving heavy loads through hubs like Louisville, Memphis, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Ontario, California, the big cargo firms had to reshuffle everything. Some routes were handed to twin-engine jets like Boeing 767s and 777s, or Airbus freighters. Some loads were shifted to charter carriers. Some shipments simply took longer. The grounding may last into early 2026 because Boeing and the FAA still have to agree on how often those engine mounts must be checked and what repairs are good enough to clear each airframe. For Western Global Airlines, a smaller carrier that leans heavily on MD-11s, the impact has been even harsher. With most of its core fleet under the ban, the carrier has furloughed all of its MD-11 pilots and is now fighting to stay in the market while the inspection rules shake out. In Louisville, a resident and two nearby businesses have filed a proposed class action case in federal court against UPS, Boeing, and General Electric, which built the engines. They claim that design choices, maintenance gaps, or inadequate warnings helped cause a preventable disaster that wiped out buildings, jobs, and lives on the ground. National aviation law firms, such as Clifford Law Offices, have also stepped in to represent families of the dead, saying they will dig through maintenance records, inspection reports, and internal emails to see who knew what about engine mount risks before this flight ever lined up on the runway. The bigger picture. At the same time, many people think this crash may speed up the end of the MD-11 era. Even before Louisville, big carriers were slowly moving to twin-engine cargo jets that burn less fuel and have better safety records. Now, with the fleet grounded and expensive inspections and repairs ahead, it may be easier for some companies to retire their tri-jets early rather than pour more money into them. For operators that keep them, the price of proving they're safe will almost certainly climb. But here's what should really terrify you. This wasn't a one-off manufacturing defect. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't pilot error. This was metal fatigue, a slow, invisible killer that was growing inside a critical component for years while the airplane passed inspection after inspection. Ask yourself, if it happened on one jet, how many others are flying right now with cracks that haven't quite reached the breaking point yet? How many cargo jets are taking off tonight, over your city, over your neighborhood, with hidden damage that won't show up until it's catastrophic? The scary answer is, we don't know. The unanswered questions. The investigation into UPS Flight 2976 is still ongoing. The final NTSB report won't be published for months, maybe more than a year, but we already know enough to understand that this disaster should never have happened. The warning signs were there in history. American Airlines Flight 191 showed us exactly what happens when engine mounts fail on this type of aircraft. The inspection intervals were set based on engineering assumptions about how long these parts would last, but those assumptions were wrong. Fatigue cracks were growing faster than anyone predicted, and the routine visual checks weren't catching them. So here are the questions that need answers. Why wasn't the inspection interval shorter for such a critical component? Why weren't more sensitive inspection methods, like ultrasonic testing or X-ray imaging, required before the cycle limit was reached? Did Boeing and the FAA know that these mounts were vulnerable to accelerated fatigue under the heavy loads typical of cargo operations? And if they did know, why weren't operators warned? These aren't academic questions. These are life and death questions. 14 people are dead because a metal part slowly cracked over years, and nobody caught it in time. The crash of UPS Flight 2976 is a stark reminder that in aviation, the smallest overlooked detail can have catastrophic consequences. A crack you can't see with the naked eye. A component that passes inspection after inspection. A problem that builds silently in the background until one terrible moment when everything fails at once. The families of the 14 victims will never get their loved ones back. The workers who survived will carry the trauma of that day for the rest of their lives. And every time an MD-11 or DC-10 freighter takes off, if they're ever cleared to fly again, people living near airports will wonder, is that one safe? The truth is worse than anyone expected because this wasn't a freak accident. It was a systemic failure. A failure of inspection procedures, a failure of engineering assumptions, a failure of the entire system designed to keep these aging cargo jets safe. And until every single one of these aircraft is inspected down to the microscopic level, until we know for certain that no other jet is carrying hidden cracks in its engine mounts, the threat remains. The next takeoff could be routine, or it could be the moment when another invisible crack finally gives way. The question isn't whether metal fatigue will strike again. The question is, will we catch it before it kills more people? Thanks for watching. This disaster changed aviation safety rules overnight and grounded an entire fleet of cargo jets. If you want to see more deep investigations into aviation mysteries and disasters, hit that subscribe button and check out the videos on screen next, because the stories behind these crashes are always more complex and more terrifying than they first appear.